Hey Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you are new to the channel, welcome. We do all things dorkly here, so whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes, we probably have a playlist about it, so enjoy. Today we're talking about Lord of the Rings, and the topic would be a brief history of Balrogs. Um, obviously the Balrog that's important to Lord of the Rings is the one that is in Moria and is slain by Gandalf. That particular Balrog goes by the name of Durin's Bane, or at least that's how it's known. I don't think it talk, hey everybody, I'm Durin's Bane, but it is known as Durin's Bane, and we'll talk about why that is. But that is not the only Balrog to have ever lived in Tolkien's world. So I thought I would just give a little background. So much of what we know about Balrogs comes from the Silmarillion, which, if you haven't read it, it's kind of like Tolkien's version of the Bible in a way, right? It's his creation myth. And I could get too into the weeds here, but just to set the stage, you've got Eru, basically Tolkien's version of God, uses song to create life. But to create the more complex life forms, he realizes he needs a chorus of song, of notes. And so he creates this chorus of the Valar, so it's kind of like the very, very powerful angels. And together that chorus sings and creates life, and all is well. But much like in the Bible, there is a corrupting influence. And so the version of Satan in Tolkien's world is Morgoth. He's one of those angels singing in the chorus. He basically does the the Miltonian Satan thing, which is the better to rule in hell than serve in heaven. And so he rebels. And when he leaves, he takes some of the lesser angels with him, the Maiar. Gandalf and Saruman are Maiar. Sauron is a Maiar. Obviously, Sauron went with Morgoth. But other Maiar that went with Morgoth became Balrogs. So they were fallen angels, essentially. And they, set up shop. His fortress was Udun, otherwise known as Utumno, but whatever. Everything in Tolkien's world has multiple names. We'll just call it Udun, which might sound familiar to you, because in the movie Fellowship of the Ring, which sticks fairly close to the text, you will remember the great Sir Ian McKellen pulls off an amazing Gandalf. I don't have to tell you that, but in this particular scene, the confronting the Balrog on the bridge at Khazad-dûm, Moria, where he has that line where he says, "I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Arnor. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun. Go back to the shadow." All right, anyway, flame of Udun. He says that. What he's referring to there, Udun is basically Tolkien's version of hell. It's where Satan lives, right? So, when Gandalf says, "I'm a servant of the secret fire," he's referring to himself. He's basically saying to the Balrog, "Hey, I'm also a Maiar spirit. I know who you are. You're a flame of Udun. You are from hell, so your Maiar spirit abilities aren't going to help you here. Prepare to meet your maker." So that's where that line comes from. Flame of Udun is a reference to the fact that thousands of years ago, I'm not sure how many, maybe 5,000 years earlier, this creature was hanging out in hell, essentially. We go back then to Udun. There's Balrogs. The number of Balrogs is up for debate. The number that are demonstrated to be killed off in various tales that Tolkien told, or probably a number in the dozens or so. He did apparently leave in the margins at one point. Christopher Tolkien found, and he had handwritten a thing saying he thought there would be no more than 7 Balrogs, but it doesn't really add up to the number that he killed off. So I think if that was his initial intent, I don't think that's what it ended up being. And maybe he's saying there's only 7 Balrogs left after, the First Age, when all this stuff with Morgoth happened. Who knows? Anyway, there's a bunch. There's more than one. Let's put it that way. So back at that time, when Morgoth rebelled, and then there were many, many wars that occurred in that First Age. The captain of the Balrogs, let's say, was Gothmog. And he was, basically, if you put Morgoth at the top, his 2 seconds in commands were Sauron and Gothmog. So Gothmog was on par with Sauron in terms of his powers. And Gothmog personally killed off, I think, 2 kings of the elves over the years, imprisoned others, was basically an unstoppable force. But he was done in a very similar way to what we end up being with Durin's Bane. There's a parallel there. So Morgoth, with the help of Gothmog and his other Balrogs, attack Gondolin, which Gondolin was this hidden elven city, kind of an elven paradise that was hidden away. But of course, like in any tragic tale, the location of the city was, they were betrayed, basically. And the location was found, and here comes evil. And there was a major battle, and the king of Gondolin at the time, his name was Ecthelion of the Fountain. Now, if Ecthelion sounds familiar, that's because he's not that Ecthelion. So Ecthelion, so you hear about the Towers of Ecthelion. And he was human. The one that you're thinking of from Lord of the Rings was human, and he was the king of Gondor. But he was named after this guy. So his name was Ecthelion because there was an elven king of Gondolin named Ecthelion of the Fountain. And Ecthelion fought Gothmog. Actually fought 4 Balrogs. So Gothmog plus 3 additional Balrogs. Kills the other 3 Balrogs. They're in the main city square at this point. The city's being overrun. And as he fights Gothmog, Gothmog disarms him. He's without a weapon. And I think Gothmog used a big axe was his main weapon. And so he's about to take out yet another king, elven king. And Ecthelion has a spiked helmet. And so he lowers his head and charges, impales Gothmog in the chest, and pushes Gothmog into the fountain of which they're named. So he's Ecthelion of the Fountain. There were these fountains that Gondolin was known for. So pushes him into the fountain, where obviously the flames are extinguished from Gothmog, and Gothmog perishes, but also Ecthelion drowns. So he dies while killing Gothmog, which you look at it, it's a very similar thing with Gandalf falling with Durin's Bane, eventually killing Durin's Bane and dying in the process. Let's remember, he's brought back as Gandalf the White, but he dies first. So it seems to somehow take the death of a hero in order to take out a Balrog. But so Gothmog was killed off in that fashion. And what then came about was what they call the War of Wrath. Maybe I'll talk about that in another topic sometime. But essentially, Morgoth was defeated, imprisoned. Balrogs were, for the most part, killed off. But at least one, probably more if one did it, but at least one, Durin's Bane, escaped the downfall of Udun and went and hid out in the mountains. So he was basically just trying to hide away from everything. And he did for thousands of years. He hid away. So, interestingly, I want to talk about real quick. There's Orcrist and Glamdring, right? The sword Glamdring is the sword that Gandalf uses to kill Durin's Bane. Orcrist, if you remember, was the sword that was found with Glamdring. This is back in The Hobbit. So this is in the Troll Cave when they find these elven weapons from Gondolin. Orcrist the Goblin Cleaver, Glamdring the Foe Hammer. And they're sister blades, essentially. Gandalf uses Glamdring from The Hobbit on. He's got that sword. Orcrist was used by Thorin in The Hobbit, and it eventually is buried with him. But kind of interestingly, most people agree, there's not 100% certainty, but Orcrist was likely the blade that Ecthelion of the Fountain wielded when he was killing the Balrogs and taking on Gothmog. Now, obviously, Gothmog disarmed him, but that's probably the blade that was knocked out of his hand when he was forced to use his helmet. So it's just interesting that both Orcrist and Glamdring were wielded by heroes that killed off our two named Balrogs. Yeah, interesting little Easter eggs there. I don't know, a little bit of trivia. Okay, so we've talked about Gothmog. We're now talking about the only other Balrog that has a name as far as we know. Durin's Bane. Durin the Sixth, hanging out in Moria. Actually, it's not called Moria at that time. Dwarves call it Khazad-dûm. It's later called Moria by the elves after Durin's Bane comes about. I think Moria translates to something like the Dark Abyss. So it's named that in some ways because there's a horrible thing living in there, and let's not go there. So it's not known as Moria until the Balrog awakens. But here in Khazad-dûm, Durin the Sixth, they dig too deep. They're digging for mithril. Dig too deep, and the spirit awakens, kills Durin. Also, Durin's son, Nain, basically rallies, the dwarven army that's living there, and they try to destroy the Balrog, and Nain is killed, and along with much of the army. And so they are forced to flee. And that's when the dwarves flee to Erebor, Lonely Mountain, eventually Smaug. They just seem to hop from carefully guarded mountain to carefully guarded mountain. But that's what precipitated them leaving Erebor, or leaving for Erebor. Now, if you saw The Hobbit or read it, you'll know that when Smaug came to Erebor and killed a bunch of dwarves there, they left and went looking. They kind of went back to Moria in some ways to try to figure out, maybe we could go back to Moria, see if that place if that thing is still there. Maybe over the time this thing has left or died or something. So they go back to Moria. They're just ping-ponging. They find the Moria is overrun by orcs. They probably knew that going in. They're like, it wouldn't have taken much intel to know that, oh yeah, a bunch of orcs are hanging out in that place. That's where we get the Battle of Moria. What is it? Azanulbazar. We see a depiction of that battle in The Hobbit and The Unexpected Journey. A really cool depiction of it, actually. But the facts are a little off. That's the battle in the movie. It's Thorin takes on Azog and cuts his hand off. Thorin and Azog were both at that battle, but Azog was killed, did not survive, and he was killed off by Dane, not Thorin. Dane is the dwarf that appears in the Battle of the Five Armies, riding on a boar in the movies. Later becomes king under the mountain after Thorin passes away. But Thorin did use an oaken branch for a shield, so that's how he got his name, was in that battle, but he wasn't the guy that took on Azog. Anyway, battle's over. Orcs are defeated. So basically, here are the dwarves. They come to Moria, they won this major victory, and now, hey, we can take Moria back. Dane is apparently the only guy, so by himself, kind of strides up to the gate. This would have been the gate, not the speak friend and enter gate on the west side. We're talking the eastern gate. So he comes up to the eastern gate and steps past, I think he steps in through the gate. He doesn't go that far into Moria, but he steps far enough in that he sees something. And we're not sure what he sees, but it's enough to make him say, yeah, no, we're not staying. And turns the army around and they leave. So one would think he obviously saw some sign of Durin's Bane. Did he actually see? I don't think he saw Durin's Bane. I don't think he would have survived the encounter. But somehow he realized that Durin's Bane was still there and that his army didn't have a chance against that thing. And so they left. And it wasn't until many years later that then Balin's company shows up. They apparently, again, this is Balin from Fellowship of the Ring. We see, when the Company of the Ring goes through Moria, they find Balin's tomb, and they find the journal where they kind of read their unfortunate tale of being killed off by orcs, but they don't really mention the Balrog in that journal. So Balin's company arrived, set up shop. Basically, unfortunately, the Watcher in the Water took out Owen, and they write about that, and they write about the orcs coming, drums in the deep, but the Balrog never came up. Also, we know that both Gandalf and Aragorn in the past had gone through Moria and had not encountered the Balrog. So it's not like the Balrog was just hanging out at the crossroads and like watching, for people. He says he only came up at certain times. I think he generally was, just down below. Also, the orcs weren't just killed off by him. It's not clear whether Sauron knew that Durin's Bane was a Balrog. And it's not clear whether the Balrog was in league with Sauron or not, although they would have probably known each other back from, back in the day, back in Udun. But it sounds more like he tolerated the orcs that were there, and they had kind of a grudging relationship. Don't bother me, I won't bother you. And Sauron was trying to block passage to the east, so he knew that Moria was a way through for perhaps the wrong people, so he wanted to block it. So if the Balrog could help in that respect, so be it. Much like Cirith Ungol, the pass that goes into Mordor, the orcs set up a tower, and there's Shelob, right? So there's this giant spider, who maybe I'll do a video on Shelob at some point as well. But Shelob would occasionally eat the odd orc. That's a fine price to pay to have this big spider guarding the passage to Mordor. And so in some ways it seems very similar to the Balrog. Oh, he's this extra thing that you got to worry about if you're going to try to get through Moria. The depiction of Durin's Bane's death in the movie, it's pretty accurate, right? So Gandalf confronts Durin's Bane on the bridge. Interestingly, in the movie, he says the great line, "You shall not pass," which is actually it's a small change, but I think it's a notable change. In the book, it's "you cannot pass," right? And he says "you cannot." Even in the movie, he says "you cannot pass" earlier in his monologue. But at the big moment of this is my last warning, he says "you shall not pass." "You shall not pass" is not in the book. He says "you cannot pass" a few different times. And it's a cannot versus shall. I think there is a difference there. Shall means I'm going to stop you. And cannot is almost more like, hey, the rules say you can't pass. I don't know. Anyway, so it's just interesting. I would guess that was maybe, maybe even Ian McKellen was like, I feel like I should say shall here because it seems more, like I'm more empowering. But the "you shall not pass," awesome line. Balrog does the whip, catches Gandalf's leg. They fall forever, land into this lake that douses the Balrog. The Balrog then climbs out. Gandalf follows it back up to the top of the mountain where it catches fire again. They fight. Gandalf kills the Balrog with Glamdring, but is in the process mortally wounded, basically carried away by eagles, and to Lorien, where he's brought back as Gandalf the White. But yes, I suppose that's essentially what I was going to talk about with Balrogs. They, powerful forces of evil. It's just kind of interesting that potentially the last Balrog and potentially the last dragon both basically took up residence in dwarven cities in mountains. So wherever a dwarven city is being built, just stay away because something horrible is going to happen. Another video I could do would be the Watcher in the Water, because that's, another. There are fouler things than orcs in the deep places of the earth. The fact that the Watcher in the Water is hanging out outside Moria as well. Anyway, there's probably a story to tell with that. But that's it. That's my Balrog tale of woe. So hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to subscribe if you want more content. If you've got an idea for a Lord of the Rings chat, put it in the comments. I'd be happy to talk about a topic of your choosing. So thanks so much, everybody. Bye now.